So we're going to do an easy week since you're still working on your midterm, and I'm just going to talk about one theory. Well, actually, it's a set of theories, norm theories. Basically, all norm theories are based on the idea that norms dictate what we believe and how we behave. When I say there's norm theories, there's social norm theories. That's probably the best known is Berkowitz's social norm theory, but there's also subjective norm theories, personal norm theories. So the norms dictate what we believe, how we behave. So what are norms? Well, a norm is something that is normal. That's where they came up with the name. They are normal for you, for those close to you, or society as a whole. Can you think of examples? Well, since you're probably not quite sure what I'm talking about yet, I'll give you some. What is polite? Well, polite according to whom? That's probably going to be a social norm. What is the right thing to do? Well, according to whom? And it could be those close to you, it could be society, it could be you. But it's still going to be dictated by something that somebody considers normal. Well, consider the phrase, you just don't do that. Well, who's saying don't do that? Again, it's going to be a norm. Norms are simply pervasive in how you behave and what you believe, and I'm talking about you specifically. Social norms are what society thinks or does. Subjective norms are what those important to you think or do. Personal norms are what you think and do. Well, which is more powerful? Depends on your self-esteem. If you have high self-esteem, your personal norms will have more weight. In other words, well, society may not think that I'm doing the right thing and others may not, but I'm confident in myself. So there's my personal norm coming through. Subjective norms will have some influence, society less influence than that. If you have low self-esteem, well, subjective norms are probably going to be more powerful, followed by social norms. Well, if we have low self-esteem, we want to fit in, and so we'll just kind of be a chameleon, and we'll just allow society or people close to us to dictate what our personal norms should be, because we certainly can't figure them out. And that's kind of the way people think. So your personal norms are really at the bottom of this particular list. There are a couple different types of norms. Beyond the personal, social, subjective, there's a couple of terms you should be familiar with that apply to all of those. Injunctive norms are what we approve or disapprove of. Descriptive norms are what we do, and they don't always match. So, most people think littering is wrong. That's an injunctive social norm. We're making a judgment on it. It's wrong. Yet, you can go to a lot of places, and yes, this picture is not on its side. That's a cyclone fence to the left side. But you go to places where there seems to be a lot of litter, and you perceive that that is the descriptive social norm. That's what people do. Okay? So, which is more powerful, injunctive or descriptive? Well, let me tell you a story. It was a really great research project where it took place in an underground parking garage. And what the researchers did is they cleaned the whole thing completely. You know, there wasn't a speck of trash anywhere. And they watched what people did when they came out to the car. And invariably, everybody went to the trash can and disposed of their trash. Then they put a litter all over the place. It was just messy. And they watched what people did. And people came out and they just threw their litter everywhere. I mean, essentially, the descriptive norm was, well, people litter, and if everybody else is doing it, why can't I? Well, then they did a third one, which I thought was really interesting, is they put litter there, but they swept it up into a pile. And what people did is, when they came out with their litter, they went and threw it in the pile instead of throwing it in the can. But in all cases, people are being guided by the descriptive norm, not the injunctive norm. In other words, the descriptive norm is more powerful. Actions speak louder than words. So they're looking at what people do, and that's dictating, to a large extent, what they do. So how do norms affect communication? Well, I think in my write-up I pointed out that a norm theory really isn't, it's more of a behavioral theory than a communication theory. But it's really important that you understand norms to to understand the impact of some of the mass communication theories that we're going to talk about. Agenda setting theory in particular, framing theory. So you need to understand this, what this theory is saying. So let's talk a little bit about norms and communication. Well, we already know that we use schemas to help with communication. That's our starting point for formulating information we're going to communicate. That's what we call up when we're trying to understand what somebody's going to talk to us about. Well, norms have an impact on what we think. They have an impact on our schemas, and therefore they affect communication, at least indirectly. Well, certainly norms influence our zones of tolerance and rejection in social judgment theory, because if we have low self-esteem and we're really looking at what society thinks, well, society is going to dictate what our zone of tolerance is and zone of rejection is regarding certain issues. So norms are kind of, again, pervasive throughout communication, but a little more subtle. You need to understand what they are. So here's some things you should know. You need to know what a social norm is. Okay? That's what society thinks or does. You need to know what a subjective norm is. That's what people close to you think, or people who are important to you. A personal norm is what you think. Now, I should make a point. I make the point in the write-up. Between subjective norm and social norm, don't think of it as kind of just cut and dried categories, because people who are very close to you, like your spouse or your parents, a very powerful subjective norm. Well, friends, there's still probably a subjective norm, just not as powerful. Maybe the people who live in your town, you're worried that they might know your parents and tell them something. So they're also kind of a subjective norm, or are they really a social norm? Anyway, the point is, it's a continuum, just based on influence. You should know what an injunctive norm is. That's what we judge things to be, whether they're right or wrong. A descriptive norm is describing what we do. Okay, so make sure you know those. Some key points. Norms have an impact on what we think, so they impact our schemas. Norms have an impact on our behavior. And the impact of norms is tied to the type of norm, whether it's an injunctive or descriptive norm, the source of the norm, is it society, is it somebody that we consider important, is it ourselves, and our self-esteem.